Hello and welcome back to the Countering Climate Skepticism podcast, episode number 3. My name is John Rainier, the history teacher, and I'm joined by my co-host, Mark Prosser, the climate researcher. How's it going, Mark?
Hey, John, it's going really well. Since I last... So we've just, started hanging out after 20-odd years of not seeing each other. And you told me that you were a metalhead.
I am.
And this is a very interesting phenomenon. And you were telling me about mosh pits.
Yeah. Introducing you to the rules of the mosh.
Exactly. Yeah. You sent me this video and I watched this video, like the introduction to mosh pits. And it was fascinating and it looked really fun.
Yeah.
Yeah, have you been in many mosh pits?
Countless mosh pits. I'm getting a bit too old for it these days. I can only handle about one a day. Yeah.
Have you ever been in? So there was this one for viewers like me who just had no idea what a mosh pit was. There's a mosh pit where there's sort of the crowd opens up in a sort of rectangular shape, and then in the middle of it, there's a few sort of brave or foolhardy individuals.
Both.
And then all of a sudden, like in a sort of battlefield scene out of Braveheart, the two sides ram into these unfortunate individuals in the middle. And my goodness, they're brave. Have you ever been in that central spot, John?
Yeah, it's known as a wall of death. I've never been right in the centre, but I've been in one of the charging lines.
Right.
I've seen a few people who've accidentally been in the middle as well. People that have gone, oh great, a straight line to the bar here, and like coming back with their drinks and then just being absolutely crushed. Not a single, I don't think they got a single mouthful of their drinks.
That is unfortunate. Anyway, fascinating thing. Listeners, check out mosh pits.
Yeah, highly recommend it. Number one rule in the mosh pit, pick each other up. So any listeners joining us today, this is the second half of a two-parter where we've been rebutting the Ziggurat level 1 argument that the climate has not changed, as argued by climate skeptics. Once again, last time Mark was a bit waffly, so we split the episode in two. And this time, last episode we covered the flat-out denial arguments. The people arguing that there's been no change, or the opposite is happening, that actually the planet's cooling, not warming up. So we looked at the argument that it's not happening, that sea levels aren't rising, and we quite thoroughly debunked all of those. This week, we are going to be covering the following categories of the Ziggurat level 1 denial arguments. The idea that we just don't know, we don't have the data, or that the data that we do have is poor quality. We're going to be looking at the argument that, it was warming, but now it's stopped. We're going to be looking at the argument that says that, some places or some parts of the world, it's cooler this year, therefore there isn't any global warming. And we're also going to be looking at the arguments that are misleading or factually incorrect. So we'll get on to all of that in due time. But first, have you had any encounters with climate denial this week, Mark?
Unfortunately, I have, John. It's
a sort of get away from them, can you?
I can't. No, I don't. Yeah, it's a sort of strange thing. I'm both drawn to it and then after spending too much time engaging with it, I'm like, why am I here? Why have I done this? But there was someone on a Facebook group, a place where they discuss climate change, and this guy was making the argument that, he started it by sort of saying, on the presumption that climate change is happening and that it's human caused. Isn't it true that just like China and India are pumping out greenhouse gases far more than America is currently? Yeah. And so what's the point? I guess is kind of what he's arguing, or they are arguing. I think it was a guy. So I decided to write him a reply. And I started the reply by saying, look, I'm presuming you're asking this question in bad faith. But just in case you're not, here is a good faith reply. And so I then went.
That's quite an antagonistic way to start that sentence there, Mark. Yeah, I'm going to assume you're a bit of a dick, but just in case you're not.
But it's like, it's, just given, I don't know, like pattern recognition, you see this 100 times, and like 97 times out of 100, it's someone arguing in bad faith. I know from the outside, I probably look like a dick, but it's just, otherwise you just get taken for a ride. I don't even know that this person's a real person. It could be some bot.
Yeah.
They're getting quite sophisticated, and they can churn out, like ChatGPT.
Climate nonsense. Yeah.
Climate nonsense. And so people like me just get their time wasted as a result. So, but anyway, I wrote him a reply. I gave him, he was asking, so, I mean, it's sort of, it's an argument that some people might have, so it deserves an answer, but I'm just not particularly sure that individual was seeking, a proper answer. And loads of people replied to him, but you could just see that, like, from the way he replied, that he was arguing in bad faith. He doesn't really want to know the answer to his question. He just thinks he's got a gotcha. Anyway, so I wrote my reply and then didn't look back. I don't know if he's replied, but.
And what was your comeback to him?
What was my comeback to him? Right. So basically, China, not sure about India, but China is actually quite concerned about climate change. It's going to be hit fairly hard. I mean, it's a slightly lower latitude as well, and it's, lots of the Chinese live near the coast and everything. So the Chinese government are concerned about climate change, and they're basically trying to get away from coal as a fuel source and transition to lower carbon or renewable energy. But because China's so massive, it's a long-term project. It's not going to happen overnight. But they are doing something, And to be honest, if you look at like places like Canada or America, and you say who's making the most effort, it's not like it's not like America and Canada are making huge amounts of effort. Compared relative to China, it's probably about level, But it's true. It was true that developing countries are now producing most of the CO2. But there's also you've also got to bear in mind that most of the CO2 in the atmosphere was put there by the US and Europe because it stays up there for so bloody long. China wasn't developing 100 years ago. Britain was. So that means that arguably we should have more responsibility, even though they're putting more up now. But they're right. We do need to have we need to get China and India on board. But in a greater sense, the way I put it to this guy was, basically we've got this huge global problem. Every country needs to be doing its best to bring down its carbon emissions as fast as possible. And it's just like, what would you rather be? Would you like to be one of the countries that's like, we're gonna do our best? Irrespective of what anyone's doing, we're going to try and bring our carbon emissions down. If everyone does this, then it might not be that bad. But
be the leading examples.
Exactly. So this kind of like positive attitude towards the problem. We've got a problem. Let's do our bit to solve it. We can't solve the whole thing. We're going to need to rely on other countries doing their bits. But this sort of like, China, pointing the thing, which is it's basically just to sort of say, therefore we shouldn't have to do anything about it.
It's very similar to the kid in the classroom who gets told off for something and says, but so and so over there's doing it too. It doesn't change the fact that their behaviour is not correct.
It's funny, but it's exactly like that, and it kind of gets you. It's like we're supposed to be adults, these are adults that are making these arguments, and it's just childish. But anyway, so I tried to. I didn't put it, after that like rough start, as you pointed out. I think I sort of, I wasn't patronising or whatever, but I made that argument. That's why we should care. So but it's a kind of, I guess it's like the Ziggurat level 1 and level 2. If you go on up to the sort of level 6, then you're on a, we're all doomed anyway, so let's just have fun, or we shouldn't wreck the economy to save the climate or save the environment. So it's kind of on that upper level. So it's it's a sort of slightly more it's higher up the Ziggurat in terms of it's less to do with the physical science and it's more to do with, I guess, like what our policy should be when confronted with this massive problem that we have. So.
Yeah. Okay. So, well, thanks very much for that, Mark. I guess we're going to get stuck into this week's topic then. So we're going to start off, I guess, with looking at some of these arguments arguing that climate change is not real.
Right. Okay. So now moving on to the category of we just don't know. The data that we have is of poor quality. And for this one, the specific example I'm going to give is, so there's this phenomenon called the urban heat island effect. You ever heard of that, John?
No, I don't think I have.
So if you build your city and you build it out of concrete and whatnot, and you...
Okay, yeah.
Yeah, I mean, would you hazard a guess at what maybe the urban...
So it's that the temperature in cities like is higher than the surrounding rural areas because the concrete reflects or traps the heat.
That's more or less exactly what it is. And one of the ways that skeptics like to challenge this idea that the Earth has warmed is they say there's a problem with all the weather stations dotted across the globe. There's a problem with some or a lot of them. So reading from the website Skeptical Science here, they quote the climate myth as follows. Temperature records are unreliable. We found US weather stations located next to the exhaust fans of air conditioning units, surrounded by asphalt parking lots and roads, on blistering hot rooftops, and near sidewalks and buildings that absorb and radiate heat. We found 68 stations located at wastewater treatment plants, where the process of waste digestion causes temperatures to be higher than in surrounding areas. In fact, we found that 89% of the stations, nearly 9 out of every 10, fail to meet the National Weather Service's own siting requirements. That stations must be at least 30 meters or more away from any artificial heating or radiating reflective heat source. Watts, 2009.
Okay.
No, yeah. You about to say anything, or?
No. I'm just looking forward to you tearing this one apart.
Well, for a start, right? Okay, I would presume that that there is a fair amount of factual bollocks in here. But even so, for example, nearly 9 out of every 10 fail to meet the standards. I guess when we measure the temperature in cities, say for example we go to a weather station in the middle of London, we're kind of interested in the actual temperature of London, because that will be so London will be warmer than the surrounding countryside because of the urban heat island effect, because London is, especially away from the parks, it's going to be, there's going to be a lot of concrete. It's going to therefore be warmer. And so we're interested in the temperatures of the inside of London in its own right, because a lot of people will have to live in that temperature. So when we're forecasting the temperature for London, it's got to be like the temperature that London is, if that makes sense.
Yeah.
But for the purposes of using that weather station as part of a global network of weather stations to work out how hot has the northern hemisphere been over the past month or year, then basically they're going to alter or modify the values from the weather stations inside the cities, so that they take out this urban heat island effect.
Right. Because
otherwise, if you didn't take it out, then you're right, that would bias the temperatures higher. Yeah. So as over time, as London has become more developed, presumably the urban heat island effect would get larger. So you might, if you had like one site in the middle of London, then over time, as London expanded, what you might find is it might get warmer. But this would not be because of something like global warming. It would just be to do with the environment surrounding the weather station increasing.
Yeah.
However, we also have many weather stations, and we have weather stations in the countryside surrounding London. well, you can either not use the weather station that's in London altogether and just rely on weather stations that aren't in cities, or you can use that rural site outside of London to calibrate and to modify the temperature in such a way that it takes out the urban heat island effect. So effectively, we have a way of dealing with this. And there's a very interesting anecdote whereby there was a physicist called Richard Muller.
Okay.
And he was he did his he was a very sort of outspoken physicist, I believe, and he had this course called Physicists for Presidents or something like that.
Right.
So he was quite out there. He had his own podcast. Well, it wasn't a podcast as such, but it was like his lectures were available for anyone on the internet to download and listen to. But he was a little bit skeptical about the temperature records himself. And so what he did was he was like, okay, I'm going to do my own analysis of the temperature records to ensure that the urban heat island effect is taken out.
Yeah.
And in order to do this, I find this a bit funny, but he actually got money off the fossil fuel companies to fund his research to do this.
So it's a good kind of skeptic, that is. Yeah.
Yes. And he did his results. He analysed his data, and what he found was that the temperature record he came up with, after he had been scrupulously careful about the urban heat island effect, was basically the same as all the others.
Right.
So this was someone who was genuinely skeptical, turned around after doing his analysis and said, I was wrong to be skeptical because, we were absolutely careful, and it looks like our results are pretty damn similar to the other results that have been done. So yes. So coming back to the original point that there's a problem with the data. Well, it's very easy to say for a denier, who doesn't know much at all, to say something like that. But our data are pretty good, and people have done repetitive analyses of them, and like with the Muller case, they found them to be decent and of high quality. Right. So we're rattling through these. Right. Okay. So the next one. So it's the sort of subtype that says, look, it was warming. We admit that. But the warming has since stopped. Let's go to slide 23.
Got it. Okay. How skeptics view global warming?
Yes, that is the correct one. Okay. So between the years 1998 and 2015, there was something that was kind of known as the global warming hiatus. And the idea behind that was that for quite a long period of time, so what's that, 17 years or so, global temperatures didn't appear to rise. And there was a lot of, I remember studying at university at that time, and I remember there was a lot of skeptics were banging on about this all the time. It was definitely the denial argument du jour at that point. And if you look, what do you think? What do you make of the temperatures between 1998 and the end on this graph?
It's so scattershot. It's hard to draw a line of best fit through it. You see, for example, 2006 looks like it's the hottest year we've ever had. But then, 2007 then looks like it goes really low. But still an increase, but lower. But it does look, compared to 1970 until 1998, it does look like, whereas that shows a steady increase, it does look like it's flatlined a little bit, but still high. It's not like it's dropped.
Yes. Yeah. So that's a good description. So basically the technique here is that, so essentially when we're talking about global warming, we're talking about a phenomenon that's happened over about the last 150 years. So it's a long-term phenomenon. So like we were talking about, climate is a sort of at least a 30-year period. So it's not just like 1 year or 2 years, because 1 year or 2 year can be up or down. Climate is a longer time period that kind of smooths out these sort of random fluctuations, perhaps because of El Nino or La Nina. But what the skeptics like to do sometimes, and they were doing it during this period of especially towards the end of it, towards like 2015, is that they took just that period of 17 years, so just that data, and so they would expand it so it fills the whole graph. And so instead of having 1970 to 2012 on the x-axis, you would have had 1998 to 2015 on the x-axis, and you would have then drawn a line of best fit through it, and that line would have been pretty flat.
Yeah.
So I mean, there's nothing wrong with what they're doing insofar as, you know, there's no choice in how you draw the regression line, the line of best fit. There's only one mathematical way to do that. So their line of best fit isn't wrong. But any idea, John, what they might have been doing wrong? Or
is it the fact that they're taking it over just such a short period of time?
Absolutely. Yeah. Yes. So if you take such data over such a short period of time, and especially if you select it such, you can select data in such a way that your trend line, the thing that tells you if you're increasing, staying the same, or decreasing, you can basically manipulate it in such a way that it comes out as flat.
Yeah.
So if we move on to the next slide 24, what have we got?
So this one is taking that same data but put a line of best fit through it right from the very start, and that shows a very steady, very consistent, continuous increase right from 1970 through to 2012.
Correct. So you see that they're bastards. Like in the they know. So every so often we get an El Nino, right? An El Nino makes a particular year a bit hotter than it would have otherwise been, and then, you know, a few years later you can have a La Nina, and La Nina brings the temperature down, and so you get a temperature which is higher, and then another one which is lower. And then if you just select that data, so you start on a high and you end on a low, then you draw the best fit line, and the best fit line will suggest that nothing's changing. But yeah, so essentially this is when people say the warming has stopped. That's kind of what they're doing, if that makes sense.
Yeah.
Right. Okay, so we're almost most of the way through now. These last few arguments can be dealt with quite quickly, but okay, so there's a certain sort of type of argument that is this year in America, it was colder than normal. Global warming? What global warming? But surely the fact that there was, you know, like a super amount of snow disproves the fact that. So if we go to slide 25.
How hot is it in the Baltics or Western Australia? That one.
Correct. Yeah.
Okay. So it looks like most of the map of the world is showing increases in temperature, some slight, particularly, I mean, the oceans seem to be increasing at a slower rate than the land. But you see some real pockets of real heat, like northern Russia. In fact, mostly it's around the poles. The increases in heat tend to congregate, as well as also the decreases in heat, which is interesting. But definitely large patches around by Peru, Mexico, California, across most of Africa, Iran, the kind of steppes, and into Xinjiang, is it, in China, and around the Mediterranean as well. very significant increases. The biggest increases definitely seem to be around the Antarctic, but also very significant drops in temperature around the center of the states, around Norway, around the Himalayas, and around the west coast of Australia as well.
Mm-hmm. And this is a graph of the world showing which month is it?
July 2023.
Correct. Yeah. Yeah. So essentially, it's the map shows red is where this July is hotter than average for July. So obviously, like a July is always going to be hotter than December. But what we're doing is we're looking at global Julys, and then we're showing that this particular July, which is July 2023, the July just gone, we're saying where has it been hotter than average, and where has it been colder than average? And where it's colder than average, we label it blue, and wherever it's hotter than average, we make it red. So, how was it for someone in the Baltics, John, in this July?
It looks like it was colder than average. So Norway, Sweden, Estonia, Finland all look blue on this map.
So do you think, on the basis of it being cooler than average for people in the Baltics and Scandinavia, do you think you can therefore conclude that the Earth hadn't experienced its hottest month for the last, I don't know, several thousand years?
No, definitely not.
Why would you say that?
Because everywhere else paints a very different picture. I mean, for us, July 2023 happened to be the last month of us traveling across the states. We were in Oregon and Washington State in that period, and it was just absolutely sweltering. You know, we were hitting above 30 degrees a lot of the time. We were looking at the news of places like Death Valley. We traveled through Death Valley on our way through from Nevada into California, and it was 42 degrees there. But I mean, it is the hottest, driest, lowest place on Earth, so you'd expect it to be hot. But it was having temperatures in July that were nudging up into the mid 50s, potentially being close to beating the highest temperature ever recorded on Earth.
Right. Incredible. I mean, I just noticed on this map for July that there's this horrendous, like almost like black patch, which is sort of at the top of Mexico. Were you near there as well?
We weren't in July.
Right.
We were there around May time. So that's, I mean, we're talking about Arizona there. So I know that Phoenix in Arizona was experiencing regularly 45-degree heat. The same with Las Vegas in Nevada. And, you know, it was unprecedented high temperatures for them,
Right.
even though they're in the desert and they're used to high temperatures.
Yes. You sound like you were sort of slightly lucky, and then with your timing that you didn't.
Oh yeah. We got lucky. We almost ended up in Vancouver. We were only there a couple of weeks ago, just about to cross over the border into Vancouver, and now it's beset by wildfires all over the place in the whole of British Columbia. So yeah, we managed to dodge pretty much all the bad weather, apart from Bakersfield. But Bakersfield's a bit of a shithole. Sorry to anyone who's from Bakersfield, but it is smoggy and horrible. It's 35 degrees.
Where is that? Is that the UK or the US?
That's Bakersfield is right in the middle of the valley in California. So when you come across from the Sierra Nevada mountains, you have this kind of open valley before you hit the coastal mountains, and it creates this real kind of hot area of California, but because of the two mountains on either side, there's also huge thick smog that gathers over there as well. So yeah, it was quite unpleasant.
Wow, right. Damn. Well, I mean, yeah, I'm pleased for you at least that you avoided some of the worst. I mean, I was hearing about like cars melting and stuff like that. You know, you wouldn't have wanted. Yes. But at any rate, good on them in the Baltics for having a cooler than average summer. But I don't think that detracts from what was happening in the rest of the world, because you have to look at the average, not the specific place you are. Right. Okay. So can we get through any more of these? The final ones literally take 1 minute between the two of them. So maybe we can do the rest of these. By the way, if you're interested, if you think I'm just being unfair, picking one random July, because it's supposed to be the hottest month ever that the world has experienced, but I mean, like within the last X number of years. You can also there's on the PowerPoint there's another Twitter link, and what it'll show you is it'll show you all the Julys for the whole world, like a little animation which takes you right through from 1850, and you can see the world gradually heating up. But every year, different places experience a little bit cooler, a little bit warmer, but overall the trend is kind of clear. The last two classes of the Ziggurat level 1, the Earth is not warming or it's getting cooler, are the ones that are simply misleading, or they're just plain incorrect. So to start with misleading, I've got 2 examples for you, John.
Okay.
The first one is, and apparently this is, I don't know if Trump was the first one to voice this argument, but he's associated with this argument. He must have made it in one of his speeches. But the argument goes, they've changed the name from global warming to climate change. And I think basically what they're trying to insinuate is that, I mean, maybe it's also linked in with that previous class where the warming has stopped. It hasn't stopped, but since 1998, if you draw a really short regression line, as we've just sort of been talking about, you could make it look like it has stopped for a period. But if you look at the longer time series, you'll see that it's just a sort of a temporary flattening out, but it's since restarted. But yeah, so I guess it's maybe linked to that, and they're saying, well, it's not warming anymore. The climate scientists need to sort of, still stay relevant. So they've completely changed the name and now call it climate change. So that's kind of, I guess, what they're getting at. Knob ends. So essentially, like, the terms global warming and climate change have both been about for decades. It's just, some people prefer to use the words global warming in a certain context. Others prefer climate change. So, I mean, just, do you have any ideas, John, just off the top of your head, like why you might want 2 different terms for the same thing? I'm putting you a bit on the spot here, I realise.
Well, I presume global warming is very specific to one aspect of what can happen to the planet due to climate change. Is that a way of looking at it? So, for example, climate change doesn't necessarily mean that everywhere in the world involves warming, that there could be other effects like rain and things like that could be a feature of it.
Yeah. No, so I think you've definitely, within your answer there, you've nailed it. So essentially, global warming is specifically talking about warming, okay, which is kind of like, I guess it's like the headline variable, that people think of. I mean, when you think of climate change, when someone says to me climate change, I think warming. That's the first thing. However, it's not just warming. That's the thing. So there's changes in the amount of precipitation. So there's more rain falling in certain areas of the world. There's less rainfall falling in others, and that's caused by this, warming. But it's not warming itself. It's sort of changes in like rainfall. What else? I mean, the ocean is becoming more acidic. That's another change in the climate. So all these different variables, basically. So it's not just warming. There's precipitation. There's the amount of where the wind is blowing is changing. So there's all different variables, not just global warming. So, but you mentioned precipitation, and that's So precipitation isn't really covered in global warming.
Okay.
Yeah. So basically, it's nonsense to say that it's a rebranding exercise. These terms are both continually being used, but depending on the context. I mean, sometimes we even talk about the climate crisis, which is another way of talking about it. That's like a third term, and it's, we use that because climate change sounds a bit like, yeah, it's changing. Things change, like whereas crisis is like, it's a bit urgent what's happening. So there's no perfect term to describe it. So we have a number of terms. Okay, so moving on to the second misleading argument. So there's Phil Jones says no global warming since 1995.
Okay.
And Phil Jones.
Who's Phil Jones?
Yeah, so he's a climate scientist. I think he's retired now, but he was a climate scientist at the University of East Anglia, which is where I did my undergraduate degree in climate science. I was taught by Phil Jones. He's a lovely guy. So this quote is just misleading because it's out of context. So basically, I think if it's not a misrepresentation, they're probably talking about this period where if you look at a very short time scale, you can't see any obvious warming trend over 10 years. So that's probably what he's talking about. Phil Jones is not for a second suggesting that global warming has stopped. And, so even while we had this period where the data looked like it was kind of flatlining, people were making bets that you would get a massive swing back to the longer term trend, because that's the nature of temperature. There's variability year to year, and you can get periods of flat, but the overall warming trend, again, earlier in this episode, if you look at the previous episode, you look in the data at a longer time series, these shorter periods are just small blips basically in a longer trend, because climate change is a fairly long-term thing. Look at 100 years, do not look at 10 years basically. Okay, so now the final category, incorrect. And so I've got 5 different arguments that I found on Skeptical Science. We'll put the link in the show notes to these, to Skeptical Science and the list of arguments. There are 219. I found 5, and just basically, it's not even worth going into them because they're just all incorrect. So they're not even misleading. Because Phil Jones did sort of say that, the thing that I said last time. But these 5 statements. So these 5 statements are: 1934 was the hottest year on record. No, it wasn't. Greenland is gaining ice. No, it isn't. Arctic sea ice has recovered. No, it hasn't. Arctic was warmer in 1940s than it is now. It wasn't. Tuvalu sea level isn't rising. It is rising. So it's just these are basically just statements pulled out of someone's arse,
So what's the? I mean, is this something that's been misunderstood? Where have these come from that people are feeling that they can confidently present them as an argument?
Well, I think they're I think they're very niche arguments. So they're not very. You won't find them everywhere, but there's these sort of these things come up every so often. And I think it's just a case of so someone can say this, and then so say for example you're at a conference about climate change, and climate denier can stand up in the audience and say, well, the Arctic was warmer in 1940 than it is today, and then the person on the stage might be like,
well, I don't have the evidence to counter.
I'm not sure. Yeah. I mean, I'm not 100% sure that is untrue. And so they basically can't say anything about it until they've checked.
It's moving into the realm of alternative facts, really, isn't it? Totally. I don't know if I've mentioned it, but when we were traveling across the United States, we were in Texas, and it just so happened we were just down the road from Waco when Trump was going to be doing a rally. So Waco is quite a famous city between Austin and Dallas in Texas, and it's famous for a shootout with a cult there, and Trump used it as the place to kind of host his first rally for the 2024 election. So in the middle of the night, while my wife was asleep, I used her email to sign us up for a couple of tickets. It was free to go. We didn't have to pay anything, but she wasn't best pleased about me dragging her along. But I was like, I've got to go and see this. And one of the things that he ended up saying, is this example of just saying something that nobody can disprove there and then. He said the Ukraine crisis, if he was president, he could solve it within 24 hours. He said, I'd get on the phone to Putin. I'd sort this issue right out. It wouldn't be happening if
Yes.
I was president. This great thing that you cannot ever prove incorrect. It wouldn't have happened if I wasn't president. Yeah, well, because you aren't president, but we can't prove that wrong.
Yes.
It seems like a lot of these facts are similar to that. Things that in the moment can't be disproved.
Yes. Yeah. It's frustrating, but in any case, in hindsight, like we on this podcast, we can look at what the state of the Arctic was in 1940, and it just, but just to be aware that these little facts that come up from the deniers, you don't take them as necessarily true. With a large grain of salt, basically. Right. So I thought I'd better make some conclusion, because this has been it's been a two-parter essentially, and it's been and I'm very impressed with your staying power here, John, because you've been you've heard. I mean, we were dealing with essentially it's all about the Ziggurat first level, which is it has not been warming, or it's even been cooling. So. But then you get so many. We've dealt with something like 10 different. I mean, I can't remember how many arguments we've specifically done in these two episodes, but they all link back to that in some way. But they're all a slightly different twist on it.
Yeah.
So there's a lot of arguments that have been covered. But there's a particular type of phenomenon which is maybe worth referencing here. So you have a phenomenon called gish galloping.
Okay.
And so gish galloping, I think it's sort of like associated with evolution denial. And so you get like with climate science, you get sort of skeptics about evolution,
intelligent design, and all of that.
Exactly. Yeah. And they're basically the strategy is that when you have there's in particular there's this video on YouTube of, and I can't remember the name of the climate scientist, and I can't find the video now, but it was this. So there's this climate denier who is sort of Republican PR guy called Mark Morano, and he's having a debate with either a climate scientist called Andrew Watson or Tim Lenton. But basically Mark Morano his strategy was to come on and gish gallop. And gish gallop is where you basically try to overwhelm your opponent with not just one argument, but a whole series of arguments. Right. So basically he says, well, your climate change is not happening because of A, because of B, because of C, because of D, because of E, because of F, C, G, H, I, J. And basically they come so thick and fast that basically no one can respond to all the bollocks that has just been like spewed or vomited all over you.
Yeah.
So basically it's this idea. There's a sort of a famous quote that a lie travels halfway around the world before the truth has a chance to put its shoelace on.
Yeah.
So Mark Morano overwhelms the climate scientist. I think the climate scientist at the end, like just before it cuts out, he's like, "What a dickhead!" But unfortunately, it looks maybe to like the uninformed that like Mark Morano cleared the floor in that debate. And that's the idea.
I think as well, like in the world of clickbait and like little kind of memes and everything like that, sound bites. It's very easy for people in those kind of situations to just kind of manufacture something that can just create a very short, very edited piece that looks like they've won the argument. And I think sometimes when you see politicians talking, when you just kind of think, hang on a minute, they've just said the same thing 3 times. They sound like they're a machine talking. And I think it's obviously a tactic of just make sure that nothing that comes from your mouth can be misquoted into something that might look like it's saying something very different to what you mean. If you stick to your one line of what you're trying to say, you can't be misquoted.
Yes. Politicians these days. Yeah. But I guess with the misleading or the incorrect, like someone can spew supposed facts that are incorrect, and What's required then is to go and like examine whether these fact check, but fact checking takes time, and you're not going to be able to do that, on a like a 10-minute segment where you're, fighting a climate denier. Yeah. So it's a sad fact, but I guess these people have just got to be shown up for what they are. Yeah. They're not arguing in good faith. So enough of that negativity. Have you got this week's positive news story for us, John?
Right. So this week's news story is actually one that you found for us this week, Mark. So this is about, it comes from the BBC. So it's about a cargo ship that has just been tested and sailed that uses wind power. Now, I appreciate that might sound like the least new news story of all time, a ship powered by the wind. But the idea being that this is not like, a pirate ship from the 1700s. This has got like these giant rigid sails. It's a British design ship that uses this new technology that means that it can basically sail around the world without needing to have a significant carbon footprint. So it's basically some statistics from the article here. It says that the shipping industry is responsible for about 2.1% of global carbon dioxide emissions. Mm-hmm. Its maiden journey from China to Brazil will provide the first real-world test of this new technology and see whether it's something effective for moving cargo forwards. It's made the same material as wind turbines, and essentially the vessel can be blown along by the wind rather than relying on its energy, which should reduce a cargo ship's lifetime emissions by 30%. And so the president of the company, Cargill Ocean Transportation, said that this isn't a silver bullet, and as we know, it's the reason why tackling climate change is so difficult, because there aren't any magic bullets to fix it. It's a journey towards decarbonising an industry, and if this technology can then be shared or developed into other technologies as well, then that will be a great step in that direction. So apparently it will take 6 weeks to reach its destination.
Okay.
So by 2025, he reckons that half of the new build ships will be ordered using this technology. It saves about 1.5 tons of fuel per day, which is quite considerable, really.
So is it a bit like your hybrid Prius car, where so they sort of like, what is it like, they sort of save the energy when you brake or something, they use it to charge the battery in the same way is the ship using periods or places where there's a lot of wind, and then it's sort of turning off its sort of diesel engines? Is that kind of the way it works?
Yeah, I'm not really too sure. I mean, I seem to think from the article itself, it seems to be suggesting that it's the latter is how it works. So that when there is wind, that it can use that to then essentially like not use the engine power. They still have to rely on their fuel engines when there's no wind, but as soon as wind is available, then it can replace that as its way of powering the engines. Okay,
yeah, it's remarkable. So we're almost like going back in time a little bit to when they only use the wind to get around. So that's fascinating. And also like shipping, I believe, what's it like, as we decarbonize other areas of the economy, shipping and aviation, they're like kind of hard to decarbonize parts of the global economy, are going to become a bigger amount of the pie, as it were. So there might be 2% for shipping at the moment, but it might be something like 20%, by 2040 or something like this. So yeah, like 30% off that is not small change. So I'm pleased to hear that something's being done, especially with these hard to decarbonize sectors. So.
Yeah, and that's the thing as well, because I think if anything, shipping I think is probably going to become more important in the foreseeable future for transportation, largely just because of air travel just being so hard to do in a kind of environmentally friendly way. If they can make big strides to it with shipping, that should make a big difference. So that's it for this week. Thank you for listening. You can find a link to all of the materials we've referenced in this episode in our show notes. What are we doing next week, Mark?
Well, it will actually probably be in 2 weeks, because we're planning to release these 2 episodes at once. But I guess the logical move, the next step, as it were, is to deal with the second level of the ziggurat. So with this episode, we've been looking at arguments against the argument that it hasn't warmed. But now on level 2, the level 2 deniers will be like, yeah, we agree that the climate has warmed, but we don't think it's humanity that's done it. We think it's natural. Okay, so basically, it's probably, to be honest, it's probably going to be another 2-parter, because there are a lot of arguments in relation to this. You know, there's the sun, it's volcanoes, it's cosmic rays. They come up with all these different. So basically, it is warming, but something else is causing it. It's just not us.
Yeah.
You know.
Yeah. It wore me, I dare do it, as they say around here.
Yeah. In Birmingham, is it?
Yeah. And the Black Country. Okay, so that's what we've got lined up for next week. If you want to know more about countering climate skepticism, then check out our website at
ccspod.podbean.com. So that's ccspod.podbean.com.
If you've enjoyed the episode and would like to support the show further, you can leave us a review on iTunes. It's called Apple Podcast these days, or you can support us on our Patreon, which is Countering Climate Skepticism. We spell skepticism with a K instead of a C, making it nice and easy for you to find us. So goodbye from me, John Rainier.
And goodbye from me, Mark.
And we'll see you again next week. I'm going to leave you with this quote for today. The greatest threat to our planet is the belief that somebody else will save it. That's from Robert Swan. We will see you next week.